Alcohol and all types of drugs were just a part of the David Ruffin lifestyle.
Did you know that behind the success of the Temptations, there was a lot of pain and sadness? These men became famous for their music, but their personal lives were full of struggles.
Meantime, Chicago police are investigating the death of Temptations lead singer Dennis Edwards. There are allegations involving his wife.
Some faced drug problems, some had money troubles, and others died too soon. How did their lives turn out so tragic? What really happened to them? The truth about the Temptations is heartbreaking.
When you are a group, you have to move and think as one unit. You cannot have five guys going, 5 different directions.
Let's start with Paul Williams. During the early days as a group, Paul Williams was the only member of the Temptations who abstained from alcohol consumption. He would, in fact, lecture his bandmates about ruining their health whenever he'd catch them covertly drinking. That's why it's tragically ironic that Williams descended into alcoholism as the Temps began to enjoy massive success as one of Motown's most popular acts. According to Otis Williams, Paul's troubles started when he had an affair with a woman named Winnie Brown. She worked as a hairstylist for the Supremes. Paul was already married and had 5 children. He loved his family, but he was also drawn to Winnie. This emotional struggle took a toll on him. Before this, Paul had never drunk alcohol. He only drank milk. But after the affair started, he turned to drinking. Soon, he was consuming 2 to 3 bottles of Courvoisier a day. His friends in the group found it hard to watch him change so much.
I truly miss Paul. Paul was one of a kind. I could always depend on him. He was solid as a rock. And he stood by me when we were going through some turbulent times, personnel-wise.
Paul and Winnie opened a fashion store called Celebrity House West in Detroit. The business did not do well, and Paul ended up owing over $80,000 in taxes. At the same time, his health got worse. He was always exhausted and in pain, but instead of going to the doctor, he drank even more to cope. His friends in the Temptations tried to help. They took away his alcohol, encouraged him to get help, and even kept oxygen tanks backstage for him, but nothing worked. His drinking continued and his performances suffered.
Long before I knew.
As time went on, Paul's condition became more serious. He would sometimes miss performances, and when he did show up, he was often too weak to perform properly. The other members of the Temptations worried about him but felt helpless. They had tried everything to help him, but he refused to change. One night, Paul left his girlfriend's house after an argument. Later, he was found dead inside his car in an alley. A gun was found near his body, and his death was ruled. Otis Williams said that Paul had spoken about ending his life before, but some people, including Paul's family, did not believe it. There were strange details about his death. Paul was shot in the left side of his head, but the gun was in his right hand. A bottle near his left hand was shattered, as if he had dropped it suddenly. The gun had been fired twice, but only one bullet hit Paul. Because of these unanswered questions, some people believe something else happened, but the official story remains the same. Paul Williams died by. His death was a tragic end to a great talent.
Melvin Franklin. I was impressed with Melvin when I heard him sing with a group called Voice Masters, and at the time he was 16 years old. And to hear a 16-year-old young boy with a bass sounding like an old man.
Melvin Franklin was an important member of the famous music group, the Temptations. He was the bass singer, and his deep voice helped make the group's songs special. He and Otis Williams were the only original members who never left the group. Melvin's deep vocals became one of the group's signature sounds, making him one of the most famous bass singers in music history. Melvin had health problems for many years. He had rheumatoid arthritis, a disease that causes pain in the joints. To help with the pain, he took cortisone shots, but these weakened his immune system. This led to other serious health problems like diabetes and a dangerous skin infection. Despite his health issues, he kept performing with the Temptations. He even had to carry oxygen tanks while touring to help him breathe. On the day of his tragic death, Melvin was in West Hollywood. He stopped outside a hair salon to talk to a friend and left his car running. A carjacker saw an opportunity and tried to steal his car. Melvin fought back, but the thief pulled him out of the car and shot him in the hand and leg before driving away. The carjacker didn't recognize Melvin at first, but even after realizing who he was, he still continued the robbery. In January 1995, while recording an album, Melvin's bandmates noticed his sock was soaked in blood from a wound on his ankle. He went home to recover, but on February 17th, he fell into a coma and never woke up. 6 days later, on February 23rd, 1995, he passed away at the age of 52 due to heart failure. His diabetes and other health problems made things worse. Many people attended Melvin's funeral, including famous singer Smokey Robinson, who sang "Really Gonna Miss You" in his honor. Otis Williams, his longtime friend and bandmate, later wrote about their close friendship. He said Melvin was like a brother to him. And after losing other bandmates, they had a special bond that no one else could understand.
You changed my life.
Eddie Kendricks is best known for his amazing falsetto voice. He used this special voice to make songs like "The Way You Do the Things You Do," "Get Ready," and "You're My Everything Unforgettable." His voice helped the Temptations become one of the most famous groups of the 1960s and 1970s. Eddie wasn't just a lead singer, he also played a big part in making the group's songs sound great. He helped create many of the vocal arrangements and even chose the group's clothes, including the famous purple suits they wore during one performance. Although Norman Whitfield was the main songwriter for the Temptations, Eddie didn't just sing. He also wrote some of the group's songs and was credited for it. His work wasn't only about singing. Eddie helped shape the sound and style of the Temptations. He had a big role in their success.
Well, I think Eddie was probably the first guy to give falsetto some real class.
In an interview with a Chicago TV show called Urban Street, Eddie talked about thinking about leaving the Temptations back in 1965. This was when the group was becoming really popular, but Eddie felt unhappy with some things behind the scenes. He thought that the people in charge didn't always care about what was best for the band. Even though Eddie had these feelings, he decided to stay because he was afraid that leaving would stop him from getting the support he needed. He also didn't have a good relationship with the leader of the Temptations, Berry Gordy. Eddie said, "I know he didn't particularly care for me, and he disagreed with some of the decisions made by the group's managers." By 1982, things had changed for Eddie. During a reunion tour with the Temptations, his health was no longer the same. Years of smoking had hurt his voice, and he couldn't sing the high notes as well as before. Still, Eddie kept performing with other former members of the Temptations, like David Ruffin and Dennis Edwards. He continued to perform for many years, but his health problems grew worse. In the 1990s, Eddie's health really declined. He had one of his lungs removed because of smoking. Eddie, who had smoked for over 30 years, used his story to warn young people not to start smoking. Sadly, Eddie Kendricks passed away on October 5th, 1992, at just 52 years old from lung cancer in a hospital in his hometown of Birmingham, Alabama. Looking back, Esther Edwards, the Temptations' first manager, remembered Eddie's special voice. She said, "Eddie just had that great tenor voice that was so captivating. He had such admirers, men and women, but the ladies really loved Eddie in his style. He just had a sweet, melodious, captivating, tender sound." Eddie Kendricks will always be remembered for his amazing talent and his voice and style left a lasting mark on the music world.
Meantime, Chicago police are investigating the death of Temptations lead singer Dennis Edwards. There are allegations involving his wife.
Dennis Edwards joined the Temptations in 1968, taking over the lead singer role from David Ruffin. But after Edwards became a member, things started to go wrong. He began partying a lot and using drugs like cocaine. This caused him to show up late or even drunk to rehearsals and shows. His behavior got worse, and he missed some performances. Eventually, Edwards was replaced by another singer. Despite these problems, Dennis Edwards didn't stop his music career. He went on to have a solo career and even reunited with Ruffin and another former member of the Temptations. They toured together, calling themselves the former leads of the Temptations. Later, Edwards started a new group called Dennis Edwards and the New Temptations, but this caused a legal fight with Otis Williams, a member of the original group. Otis didn't like that Edwards was using the Temptations name. In 1997, a judge allowed Edwards to keep using the name New, but Otis didn't give up. He took the case to court again, and eventually the court ruled that Edwards couldn't use the name Temptations. So, Edwards changed the name of his group to The Temptations Review featuring Dennis Edwards. Dennis Edwards passed away in February 2018, just 2 days before his 75th birthday. His death was caused by complications from meningitis. However, there was a lot of drama before he died. An emergency order was filed that accused his wife, Brenda, of neglect and it was claimed that Brenda took away Edwards' hearing aids, phone, and iPad, and even tried to suffocate him. His daughter said that the doctors never mentioned meningitis. Brenda Edwards denied all the accusations. She said she loved her husband and would never hurt him. Later in 2018, it was discovered that the accusations were false, and Brenda's name was cleared. Now, most people did not know that Al Bryant was one of the original members of the Temptations. So Bryant started to get frustrated as the group's success grew. He didn't like how slow things were moving and started missing practices. He even began having fights with the other members. According to Otis Williams, Al also started drinking more, which made his attitude worse. Things got worse when Al attacked Paul Williams with a beer bottle during an argument. Despite this, Paul convinced the others not to kick Al out of the group, but Al's behavior got even worse. At a Christmas party in 1963, he caused trouble again, and this time, the group decided it was too much. They fired him. Years later, after a show in Detroit, the Temptations ran into Al. He looked very different. His hair was messy and he had dark circles under his eyes. Otis noticed he seemed very sad. Sadly, Al Bryant passed away on October 26, 1975 at just 36 years old from cirrhosis of the liver. His story was a sad reminder of how a promising career can be ruined by personal struggle.
Me and Marvin used to pack records for Allen Records. My first record was on Vigo Records with Tommy.
After the Temptations let Bryant go, they needed someone new. That's when they brought in David Ruffin to replace him. With David in the group, the Temptations finally found what they had been missing. They were now ready to become one of the biggest names in Motown. Smokey Robinson saw that David Ruffin had a special voice. His voice was mellow but strong, which made him stand out. Smokey thought David could sing a hit song, so he worked with his friend Ronnie White to write My Girl. They let David sing lead, and the song became a huge success, reaching #1 on the pop charts. It was the Temptations' first big hit, and still one of their most famous songs today. David Ruffin's childhood was tough. He lost his mother when he was very young and grew up in a poor family. His father, Eli Ruffin, was said to be a and made David and his siblings sing in church. David's older brothers had to deal with physical abuse from their father. Later, the group's music took a different turn. Norman Whitfield, the new producer, added a more upbeat, funky sound. His song, Ain't Too Proud to Beg, became a huge hit, and Whitfield became the Temptations' main producer. With David's voice and the new sound, the Temptations' success continued to grow. But as the group became more successful, problems started to happen. One of the biggest issues was his growing drug addiction. Ruffin started using cocaine in the 1960s, but by the end of the decade, his drug habit became a serious problem. His friend Linster Butch Merle remembered how bad things got, saying, "He was getting so high, the man was a walking skeleton." Ruffin's drug use caused him to miss rehearsals and performances, which worried the other members of the Temptations.
And when you are a group, you have to move and think as one unit. You cannot have five guys going, five different directions.
As Ruffin's success grew, he began to expect special treatment. He started riding in a private limo with his girlfriend, Motown singer Tammy Terrell, while the other members of the group had to share a different limo. This behavior started to annoy the other Temptations. Ruffin also wanted the group to be renamed David Ruffin and the Temptations, just like how other Motown groups like Diana Ross and the Supremes had their names changed. The other Temptations didn't agree with this request and grew frustrated with him.
Well, you see, when we first started out, we made a vow that we would not change, because we had heard about Frankie Lyman leaving the Teenagers and Tony Williams leaving the Platters, so we made a vow.
Things started to get even worse when Ruffin had issues with Motown's boss, Berry Gordy. Ruffin wanted to know exactly how much money the group was making. Motown agreed to let an outside accounting firm look at the group's finances, but the firm didn't have full access to the financial records. By this time, Ruffin's drug use was causing him to miss meetings, rehearsals, and concerts, which only made the tension worse. The breaking point came when Ruffin missed an important performance in Cleveland because he wanted to go see a show with his new girlfriend, Barbara Gail Martin. The rest of the group had enough and decided to fire him. They made it official by drawing up legal papers, and the next day, Dennis Edwards was brought in to replace Ruffin as the lead singer of the Temptations. David Ruffin and Eddie Kendricks were once good friends before they both became famous. Their bond started long before they joined the group, but things changed when Ruffin was kicked out of the Temptations. At first, Ruffin seemed okay with it. He even told his friend Eddie to do well with the group. But everything took a turn when Eddie took the stage as the new lead singer of the Temptations. Ruffin, who had once been the lead singer, showed up at one of the concerts where Eddie was performing. He took the microphone and started singing his old song, Ain't Too Proud to Beg. He did this at many shows during the tour. Even though the group hired extra security to stop him, Ruffin always found a way to sneak onto the stage and take over the performance. He couldn't let go of his past fame, and this caused a lot of problems for everyone. After leaving Motown Records, Ruffin moved to Warner Brothers Records and released 2 albums, So Soon We Change and Gentleman Ruffin. Later, Ruffin and Eddie worked together on some music. Sadly, things ended tragically for Ruffin. He passed away on June 1st, 1991 from a drug overdose. He was found in a crack house in West Philadelphia where he had been with his friend Donald Brown. His life ended too soon, and it was a sad moment for the music world.
Alcohol and all types of drugs were just a part of the David Ruffin.
In the book Temptations, Otis Williams, a founding member of the Temptations, remembered seeing Ruffin just before he died. Otis said that Ruffin didn't look like the same person anymore. Drugs had taken a toll on his body, and he looked very weak. Otis knew that Ruffin's time was running out. It was a heartbreaking end to the life of a man with so much talent. Another tragedy in Otis Williams' life was the death of his son, Lamont. Lamont was just 24 years old when he died in a workplace accident in 1985. This loss was incredibly difficult for Otis, but even though he was in deep pain, he found comfort in music. In a 2023 interview, Otis said that performing with the Temptations helped him forget his sorrow for a little while. When he was on stage, he realized that he was making people happy. Despite losing his son, Otis kept pushing through and continued to perform. His love for music helped him turn his grief into something positive. Otis Williams has faced many personal challenges in his life, but he has always kept the music going. He has been a leader for the Temptations and is often called the glue that holds the group together. Even though he didn't always sing the lead parts, Otis was the one who guided the group through tough times. His strength and determination have kept the Temptations going for many years.
The Temptations could have come from central casting. You had 5 great-looking, 6-foot or more singers.
The Temptations were formed in the early 1960s, coming together from 2 earlier groups, The Distance and The Primes. Known for their smooth voices and energetic dance moves, they became a musical powerhouse.
They dressed better than anybody else, they danced better than anybody else, they sung better than anybody else. So there you have it, the Temptations.
The story of the Temptations starts with 2 friends, Eddie Kendricks and Paul Williams. They began singing in their local church, where they discovered their love for music. As teenagers, Eddie and Paul wanted to form a singing group. They teamed up with 2 other friends and called themselves the Cavaliers. They later met a man named Milton Jenkins, who saw their talent. He became their manager and helped them change their name to the Primes. At the same time, Otis Williams was starting his own group called Otis Williams and the Siberians. By 1960, the Primes broke up. Eddie reached out to Otis, who was looking for more singers for his group. Otis was trying to form a group to audition for Motown, a famous music label run by Berry Gordy. Otis invited Eddie to join, but Eddie had one request. He wanted Paul to be part of the group too. Otis agreed, and Eddie and Paul moved back to Detroit to join Otis's new group, which would eventually become the Temptations. The Temptations started with 5 members: Otis Williams, Eddie Kendricks, Paul Williams, Melvin Franklin, and Al Bryant. They first called themselves the Elgins and worked hard to get ready for an audition with Motown. When Berry Gordy, the head of Motown, heard them, he liked their sound and decided to sign them. They tried different names, even recording as the Pirates for a short time, but eventually they became known as the Temptations. The Temptations struggled at first to have a big hit, and some people jokingly called them the hitless Temptations. During this time, a young singer named David Ruffin became interested in joining the group. He followed them to performances and hoped for a chance to sing with them. One night, David finally got the chance to sing on stage with the Temptations. His voice and energy impressed everyone, and he seemed like the perfect fit for the group. Over their career, they released 4 songs that reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. They also had 14 songs that hit #1 on the R&B chart. The Temptations were the first Motown group to win a Grammy Award. They won it in 1969 for their hit song Cloud 9. Later, they won 4 Grammy Awards in total. In 1989, the group was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This was a big honor, and it recognized their contribution to music. 3 of their songs are considered some of the best in rock and roll history. My Girl, Just My Imagination, Running Away With Me, and Papa Was a Rolling Stone are all on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's list of the 500 songs that shaped rock and roll. The Temptations were also ranked number 68 on Rolling Stone magazine's list of the 100 greatest artists of all time in 2010. In 2023, Billboard magazine ranked them number 1 on their list of the 100 greatest R&B hip-hop artists of all time. Even in 2025, the group continues to perform. Otis Williams, the last surviving member, still leads the group and owns the rights to the name The Temptations. Despite many changes over the years, the group's music continues to inspire and entertain people around the world.